and outreach assistant at the CoralWatch at the University of Queensland. And today, this webinar is going to be the first one of a series of a couple for the next couple of weeks in November. So with the CoralWatch, we have been thinking about putting together this webinar series, given the potential bleaching that could happen this summer on the Great Barrier Reef, given that we've already seen some bleaching happening in different locations around the world, like the Caribbean, PNG, and so on. And so we thought about putting together this webinar series, which could be really informative for people and could be a really good way to reach communities around the world to know a bit more about what's coral bleaching and how that can impact coral reef ecosystems. And so today, the presentation will be about the power of citizen science for bleaching predictions. And I'd like to thank CoralWatch founder, Professor Justin Marshall, CoralWatch project manager, Diana Kleine, and Karen Johnson, who's the other CoralWatch assistant. So first of all, I'd like to start with the acknowledgement of country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodianships of the lands on which we meet today. And I'd like to pay my respect to the traditional owners of all the lands where I've conducted fieldwork and research over the last few years for allowing me to use the sea country. And I'd like to pay my respect to the ancestors and to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And so the outline of this presentation, a brief introduction about why are coral reef important, what kinds of corals contribute to make coral reefs, what are the threats to coral reefs, and a focus on coral bleaching and how we can assess coral bleaching predictions and collect data both environmentally and with citizen science. And then I'll focus on CoralWatch citizen science programs and all the improvements we've been working on over the last few years. And so just as a starting point, I always like to start by saying that coral reefs are comparable to rainforests. So they are the rainforests of the sea. Imagine locating yourself into a tropical rainforest surrounded by trees and different organisms. You can think of those trees as if they were corals. Although corals are not plants but animals, they do function similarly to trees in a rainforest, because they really support different biological communities of fish and invertebrate species, because they can provide for them feeding area or shelter areas, for example, given their really complex morphological structure. And clearly here you can see from this video that as soon as I go closer with my camera to the fish retract into the corals. And so they go within the branches, or they come closer to the corals to look for shelter and look for protection. And so really corals with complex branching structures and different morphological structures really provide important areas that fish and invertebrates use to survive. And coral reefs are spread across the world. They are usually found in the equatorial areas, and the three main areas where we can find coral reefs are the Caribbean, the Red Sea, and the Indo-Pacific area. Close to us is the Indo-Pacific area, especially the Coral Triangle, which is the area where we can see the highest biodiversity. And so this really high biodiversity includes lots of species of corals. And we can count about 800 species of corals, including different kinds of corals, hard corals, black corals, and soft corals. So what are really corals? So I've just anticipated that corals are animals, and we can think about them as apartment buildings. So basically a colony. We call each coral itself a coral colony because it's made of different polyps. So a polyp is the flowery looking structure that we can see within the corals. Each polyp has a mouth, and that's basically an individual that forms a colony. And that's a very similar structure comparable to an upside down jellyfish, pretty much. Polyps are very genetically identical, and they share resources with one another. Then they secrete a protective calcium carbonate skeleton, which is called the corallite. And that's how really hard corals form reefs, by secreting calcium carbonate skeletons. And it's really important to really understand what's inside a polyp. Inside each polyp, we have a single cell algae, which is called zooxanthellae. This zooxanthellae lives in a symbiotic relationship with the coral, which means that both individual benefits from living with each other. And so the algae provides the coral with the color. Remember this for talking about the bleaching, and then it provides it with food. Whereas the coral provides a really safe home for the zooxanthellae to be protective and to survive. And so these really beautiful coral colonies, as I anticipated earlier, they really are characterized by very complex morphological structures. And so they provide and support fish communities. So you can clearly see from these photos, you've got butterfly fish, which are called corallivores. So they eat on the corals that pick on the coral branches, but also other planktivores like these snappers around that can use the corals as a source of protection. And so really coral morphology is a very important feature. On coral reefs, we don't only have hard corals, but we also have a lot of other different benthic structures. Benthic means that they form the benthic habitat, so they compose coral reef structures. And these 3D structures are, for example, soft corals, sponges, and gorgonians. They all function similarly to hard corals in the sense that they support biological communities, and so we call them ecological engineers. And so I just wanted to talk briefly about gorgonians, which has been my study topic for the last few years. I've done a bit of research on these structures, and I can really say that are as important as hard corals on coral reefs. They're very diverse. They are characterized by really unique morphological structures, from single whips to fan-looking like structures to unique candelabrum structure like the second photo on the right. And they're filter feeders, so that means that they filter the particles in the water column, and they are widespread in all coral reefs, but also in temperate areas. It's really important to understand their distribution and abundance, which is slightly different than hard corals. And so while we find hard corals in shallower areas because they need to photosynthesize, we usually find gorgonians in deeper areas. And so I've done a study on the inshore area of the Great Barrier Reef around the Palm Islands, where we found that really gorgonians are more abundant in deeper areas, and also they really prefer areas with high current speeds and complex topographic complexity. And so similarly to hard corals, these structures support a lot of associated communities in very similar ways. So we go from the grouper on the top left using the gorgonian to hide, so as an ambush predator to hide to then get the prey, to the very famous pygmy seahorse on the bottom right, that has a really symbiotic relationship with just one species of gorgonian, and it has developed over time to look exactly like that one species, so to basically to camouflage. And then we also have other different relationships of fish using the agglomerates of whips to hide, for example, the batfish on the bottom left. And so overall, this really means that coral reefs are really diverse, and although they cover a small space of the ocean on the planet, they are home to almost 25% of all known marine species. And here you can see diversity of really small critters that you can find on the coral triangle, for example. And so not only for balancing the marine ecosystems, but coral reefs are also really important to sustain livelihoods of people that live nearby coral reefs. And so coral reefs protect these communities from coastal erosion, for example, and they also provide jobs. So think about the Great Barrier Reef, where millions of people every year come to visit, to dive, to snorkel. So tourism is a really big source of income for people that live nearby reefs, as well as reef fisheries, especially in smaller communities, in more remote communities around the world. But also coral reefs have been proven to provide really important sources of chemicals that are used in medicine. For example, some gorgonians are. And so to be able to thrive, coral reefs need to to have some optimal conditions. These optimal conditions really are about having the right light intensity to be able to photosynthesize, and that's why hard corals are usually found in shallower areas, more abundant in shallower areas. They need to have clear waters, so low turbidity, and also salinity needs to be between 32 and 42 ppt. Water temperature, one of the most important features, doesn't need to exceed a certain threshold. This 18 to 29 degrees Celsius is really an average overall, although each location around the world has its own optimal water temperature. And so if the water temperature is higher than what it should be, so the optimal condition, then that can cause severe habitat degradation. And so habitat degradation has been an issue over the past decades on coral reefs. Habitat degradation, which has been caused by anthropogenic stressors, has then caused on coral reefs severe degradation on the state of health. And so we have, for example, been seeing outbreaks of crown of thorns starfish over the Great Barrier Reef, to the point that there are research boats that try to kill them to be able to contain the outbreaks. So the crown of thorn is the starfish on the bottom left that really, we can say, that eats the reef. There have been diseases spreading across the reef, and also see this central photo here, where you can see the white and the red that is also caused by the cots, by the starfish. And also we've been seeing fluorescent and stress corals on the reefs, bleaching, macroalgae overgrowth, and really bleaching has been one of the most severe habitat degradation results that has been happening over the last decades. And so what's coral bleaching? So remember that zooxanthellae, the unicelled algae that I mentioned earlier that lives in the polyp, that provides color and food for the corals. And so once the water temperature really goes above the optimal condition that I mentioned earlier, what happens is that the corals get stressed. And so they become fluorescent, which doesn't mean that they're healthy, they're actually really stressed, and their health levels are quite low. And that means that then the coral releases the zooxanthellae. Once the coral releases the zooxanthellae, the coral becomes white, and so it bleaches, so it loses its color. And by losing its color, then there are two ways that the bleaching can go. So if the water temperature go back to the optimal levels, so go back to the average levels, and the overall ecosystem balance reassembles, then the bleached coral can then recover slowly and then go back to being a healthy coral. However, if the water temperature still stays above the optimal levels, then the bleached corals becomes dead. And so what happens when the corals become dead, then they can be overgrown by macroalgae, for example. And that really can take a specialized habitat away for a lot of those biological communities that the corals were sustaining. And over the last 7 years, we've also been seeing lots of different bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef. They have been covering all different areas from north to south of the GBR. And really severe events have been in 2016, 17, and 2020. And last year also, we had a really severe bleaching event on the over summer in 2022. And I was, I would say, lucky, but also it was quite a sad experience to be able to do some research and being involved with the Australian Institute of Marine Science in conducting ecological monitoring in the Central Great Barrier Reef while the bleaching was happening. And these photos were exactly taken while the heat wave was happening. And so all the corals, especially in the lagoon areas, were bleaching, and it really looked like swimming in a graveyard. And it's really quite sad to see these corals a month earlier being thriving on the Great Barrier Reef, and a month later looking like a graveyard. A lot of these corals eventually recovered, but quite a good percentage eventually died. And not only corals can bleach, but also anemone can bleach. And this was an experience I've had recently in 2023 in Papua New Guinea. We were studying how bleaching is affecting anemone and anemone fish. And you can clearly see different stages here of the bleaching. So the top left is an anemone completely bleached, fully white. Anemone can also recover as well. And so you can see a partially bleached anemone on the top right. And then this grainy, very weird looking anemone, which I initially thought it was not doing very well, although it's actually recovering, is a recovering anemone, so on the bottom left. And so that means that all these anemone can actually recover and go back to their healthy state, which is the bottom right. And so bleaching is really an event that is not only happening to corals, but also to other structures like anemones. And so bleaching is not only restricted to the Great Barrier Reef, but it's also becoming a global event. In 2023, we've already been seeing a mass bleaching event happening in the Caribbean area a few months ago. And I've been witnessing also Papua New Guinea bleaching 3 or 4 months ago. And we are expecting, because of it's an El Nino year, that the Great Barrier Reef may present bleaching, coral bleaching happening over the next few months in summer. And so why is bleaching happening? Bleaching is happening because of higher carbon emissions, obviously higher effects, long-term effects of climate change, sea surface temperature that are going way above the averages. And also this really causes a higher frequency and severity of bleaching event all across the world. And so coral bleaching not only impacts corals themselves, but obviously it impacts all the associated fauna. If your home is not doing well, then the fish cannot really live in their homes. And so there have been some publications regarding the declines in fish population following bleaching events, and obviously phase shifts. So fish that are highly specialized, for example, gobies that use certain species of corals as their unique homes, then have been declining in numbers. So this means that we shift from a dominance of coral-associated species to less habitat-specific species. And so we have definitely shifts in community, which means that because we are losing some species of corals, we then lose certain groups of fish as well. And similar things have been happening to the gorgonians that I mentioned earlier. Although gorgonians are not being affected by bleaching, they are being affected by long-term effects of climate change, which causes them to basically look like bare trees, to lose their tissue, and to being overgrown by certain species like sponges, for example, but also by corals sometimes, or by algae. And so this means that fish really, the fish that were associated with these species, the same as with corals, they lose their homes. And so we have declines in fish, and fish start using gorgonians for different purposes. So to be able to actually collect data and know more about all these issues that climate change is causing to coral reefs, a lot of environmental data collection has been happening over the last decades. And so this ecological monitoring, lots of different institutes across the world and university have been collecting data and monitoring, long-term monitoring of coral reefs, for example, aerial surveys to see where the bleaching is happening, monitor the fluorescent stress corals, for example. There have been lots of genetic studies and understanding, for example, if certain genetic crosses within certain species of corals within certain locations can actually handle the heat stress. And so heat stress experiments in the lab and in the field have been taking place, for example, the Australian Institute of Marine Science. And also the use of the CoralWatch chart for different ecological monitoring, for example, for 3D modeling and for stereo video transects. And also, over the last 20 years, the only global early warning system of coral reef ecosystem environmental changes has been put in place by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the States. And they, every week, publish new bleaching predictions across the world based on remote sensing model and in situ data. So what they do is they actually give a warning about what and where bleaching could potentially happen weekly. And this is a really good tool that is accessible for everyone and that people can use to really understand whether the area where they are or a specific area can be at risk of bleaching based on, for example, sea surface temperature increases. And so this is where the core part of this presentation comes in. And so how does citizen science contribute to bleaching prediction, and how important is actually that everyone takes part in understanding, in providing data for bleaching predictions. And so this is where the CoralWatch comes in. So CoralWatch has been existing for over 20 years now. So that means that we've got about 20 years worth of data, which is a large amount of data, and from a lot of places around the world, from about 80 countries and over 1,900 reefs. This means that we have lots of valuable members, about 6,000 members, and we outreach to communities daily, both through workshops, through educational material, social media, and we really want to reach as many people as possible to collect data and to contribute to help save our coral reefs. And so the CoralWatch really bases its own method on the color. Color is an indicator of coral health. Clearly, the first photo was a healthy coral, and this is a bleached coral. And so that's where the CoralWatch health chart comes in place. The Coral Health Chart is a really easy method that anyone can use. So if you're going snorkeling, diving, or reef walking, and you see corals around, you can actually complete a survey. A survey is usually composed of about 20 corals. And so to monitor this coral, you can record the lightest and the darkest color of the coral. And that means that we can then get an average of more or less the color scheme of the corals. Then you can record what morphology of coral you've surveyed. So whether it's a branching, a plate, a soft, or a boulder, for example. And a couple of monitoring tips: don't measure the tips of coral, they may be misleading, they're usually a bit lighter than the overall color of the coral, and don't measure blue corals, which are less common. And so overall you get this slide where you can put your different data, so the location where you are, if you've got GPS, the depth we've conducted a survey, the sea surface temperature, which is really important data, and then the weather. That way we know we have that in our database, and that really contributes to the understanding of the potential bleaching. And so where does most of the data come from? I've just mentioned that CoralWatch has a really huge outreach all around the world. And the first bar graph really shows how from 2003 to 2023, the number of surveys and the number of corals surveyed by Australia has really been an important part of our database. We've got about 80 countries contributing to our data sets, but Australia is really having a large contribution in percentage. And also, where does most of the data come from? We have different organizations putting data in our database, and schools and universities represent 49%, and conservation groups about 40%. Each individual is a valuable contribution to our database. But it's really actually interesting to see that schools and universities and conservation groups really provide loads of data, which means that the CoralWatch has a great impact, educational impact overall. And over the last few months or so, given also this potential bleaching prediction happening, we have been working with a very skilled software developer in improving our database and providing better feedback to our users. And so we've put together this really interactive kind of database. It's really a map. You can see it on the top left with different dots that then spread out based on the different locations and reefs where the surveys have been conducted. And so it's an interactive map which you can click on, and you can get different graphs and different information about the surveys that have been conducted in particular locations. And the new and really great feature that we've been putting together in this new database is this potential bleaching graph, which really shows the healthy hard coral counts and the potentially bleached coral counts. So if the average is less than 2. And that is within a minimum of 15 hard coral samples per survey. And this really is just an early warning potential bleaching that we've put together to really understand where then environmental data collection could take place, and to inform research stations, for example, as well as universities, governmental agencies, and so on. And this really new database improves the understanding of bleaching predictions. And we've also kept some of the kept and improved some of the usual database features that CoralWatch already had. And we've got the frequency graph of the coral distribution across the location selected. And we're also showing the breakdown of coral types for the different surveys across the location selected. And that really gives an idea of the coral composition, so basically the benthic composition of the survey taken. And so why is it important in 2023, 2024 to get more data? As I've mentioned earlier, we are in an El Nino year, which means that we have the potential to see higher sea surface temperature and a warmer summer, basically. So that means how much coral will bleach this time? And given we've got this question, and given we've got Caribbean already bleached, Papua New Guinea was already bleaching, we are expecting that the Great Barrier Reef may have some bleaching too. And so we really want to contribute to environmental data for example, to NOAA, the governmental agency in the United States, as well as different governmental agencies in Australia. And we really want to spread awareness for protecting coral reefs. And so here with CoralWatch, we are asking all of you to join us, to provide us with CoralWatch surveys. And really this graph shows how over time people have been contributing and people have been reached over time with CoralWatch. You can see the engagement, so basically the number of people reached. And after COVID, we actually are increasing back again to the levels that were before COVID. And so we have really high number of events. So you can actually participate to these events, learn about CoralWatch. For example, this webinar could be one of those events, and really contribute to, with citizen science data, to environmental data. And so what we've put together also is student programs on Heron Island. And we put together an ad and different documents to really call for data during this potentially warm summer, and to instruct teachers on how to collect and analyze data for their students. And really, this is another demonstration on how CoralWatch has really a powerful impact on the educational side of the new generations. And really, this is important because the more we reach people, the more data we collect, and the more we can help to protect the reef. And so community outreach done by CoralWatch. CoralWatch organizes multiple workshops over the years. So usually we have one ambassador workshop per year, where you can become an ambassador of CoralWatch, and so basically volunteer and organize events, presentations, stalls across Australia. We have a new event that will start this year in the next month or so, the Youth Ambassador Program, which really aims to involve students, young students, and their families to learn about coral reefs, to learn about CoralWatch, with the aim to spread that to their communities, to their regional communities. For example, we always organize in situ service. So every time we have workshops, for example, the ambassador workshop in Heron Island, people collect data using the CoralWatch method. We frequently organize presentations, webinars, different workshops in different locations, including this year we've organized children's hospitals presentations, universities and different institutions. And also we participate in local and local festivals around Australia. And so as a conclusion for this first webinar of this series, we really, I hope you've really enjoyed and understood how combining citizen science data is really important to combine with environmental data, and how they can really work together to have better bleaching predictions, how important community outreach and especially reaching young generation in schools is. And also I'd like to say that the CoralWatch is part of the bleaching prediction project that has been put in place at UQ for this 2023-2024 potential bleaching happening on the Great Barrier Reef. And so if you like this presentation, I'd like to invite you to follow the CoralWatch social media page, or if you like the photos, I put some QR code up here. You can follow my my photography page. And thank you very much. And if you got any questions, now we've got some time for questions. Okay. So if you want, if you have any questions, you can just speak up on your microphone or just write in the chat.
Can you hear me? Because then I can ask a question.
Yeah. Oh,
yes,
hello.
I'm Liz. Sorry. I was just wondering if all the data you collect actually feeds into any other monitoring programs on the reef, like the Reef Knowledge System or the long-term monitoring program with AIMS or anything like that, or is this another separate way of collating data for the reef?
So it's a bit of a different way in the sense that, for example, the AIMS long-term monitoring data is ecological data. So they're transects and they go back to the same sites every year or every 6 months or so. So the CoralWatch has some kind of long-term monitoring data. We have data on certain sites in Heron Island, for example, the permanent transects for a long time, so for many years. But the rest of the data that comes from all around the world is, you know, it comes from different locations. Sometimes it comes from the same ones, but it's not a scientific replicate, if you know what I mean. It's not that we go on the same location at all times, because it's people from all different countries that collect data. And yes, in some location like Honduras, for example, really provides lots of data in the same locations, but it's not as systematic as it could be a long-term monitoring program, for example, like a scientific one. But it does provide really good data, for example, on Heron Island and particular locations where we've got data from many years.
Thank you.
That's right. Let me know if you've got any other question or curiosities.
Hi there, Marta. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Sorry, everyone. I'm not a scientist. I'm actually a wildlife filmmaker, so it's not really a science-based question. But on the map where you had locations of different coral reefs where you're getting data from, there were a few in Africa, and I'm from South Africa myself. And I saw one up. Is it correct in saying it's on the north coast there of Somalia?
So in the map, you mean the one where I said the three main centers of biodiversity were the Red Sea, the Indo-Pacific and Caribbean area?
No, there were a lot of small little dots around the world on the map.
Let me see. I'm just looking which one.
No worries.
So
yeah, I saw a few. There was one in South Africa, one in Mozambique, one up in Somalia there. It looked like the mouth of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden.
So if you mean if the coral reef extends to to Somalia?
Yeah, I was just wondering who was getting that data for you from there.
So I think I'll share this screen. I think that's the map that you mean. This one. Is that the one?
I'll see now. No, it was a different one, but that's okay.
Sorry, I'm completely.
No problem. All good.
So actually this one is the other map I've got in the presentation. So I'd have to say that to me, all the coral reefs obviously go around the east side of Africa. So
Yeah.
Somalia will have coral reefs. They had the opportunity to dive in like Kenya, Madagascar, all the area. They have coral reefs. So basically where you find those optimal conditions of the water, then corals can survive, and then they can create a coral reef. And so you've got areas, for example, in the equatorial areas, usually, for instance, Papua New Guinea, the optimal conditions are quite regular all over the year. So for example, if you go there to dive, it's always about 30, 31 degrees. The lowest can be 29. But for example, if you come to Australia, then you've got the winter where it goes down to about like 20, 21, and it's actually quite cold. And then in summer, it goes up to 29. So there's a lot of different differences between winter and summer, and also where the coral reef is located in the world.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And I was just asking in terms of also bringing up a point there. I went to do a project in Somalia in a place called Berbera, on the Gulf of Aden there, and diving on the coral reefs there, to document another problem going on there, where there's a company called DP World, Dubai Ports World, where they've built a port there, and they actually built it on top of the coral reef, and now they want to extend it. So it was just a project that we went and filmed. So are you based in the University of Queensland? Because when it comes out, it would be great to come and show it to you, or if anybody else would be interested.
So we're based at University of Queensland in Brisbane.
Yeah.
So yeah, please share that with us. And obviously, when there's all these constructions happening, there's a lot of places around the world where it's happening. There are biodiversity assessments, like environmental impact assessments done. But yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, different dynamics that
I think that was the problem with this project, that there wasn't an EIA done initially, and that they want to extend. Everybody was saying, why didn't you do that in the first place? But anyways, thank you. That's my question and a bit of info.
Thank you.
It'll be good to chat to you.
Just send us an email to info@coralwatch.org.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat.
Thanks.
If there are any other questions or curiosities. No more questions? Okay, so if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you, all of you who attended the webinar today. And I'll pop some more information about the next one, which will be next Wednesday, on our social media, so Facebook, Instagram, X, and we'll put the recording of this presentation on the YouTube channel, and you can find I'll put the link on our social media as well. If you got any other questions, you can either email CoralWatch, or you've got my contact through the QR code at the end of the presentation. And thank you very much for attending this webinar.